Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. How you guys all doing? Happy New Year, and how was the celebration? Hope you guys are all fine. Anyways, we are going to be continuing from where we stopped from my previous video last year. Sorry, I'm uploading this video now. I was actually very busy during the festive period with a whole lot of things, and I was unable to create the video. Even though I had already sewn it, I couldn't edit and all of that. But we are going to be continuing from there. So the first thing I went ahead to do was to place my pattern on the fabric and cut, just like I showed in the previous video. You're going to be adding half an inch sewing allowance to the parts that I'm pointing now. But on pattern paper 3, we are going to be adding 1 inch sewing allowance, while around the armhole you're not going to be adding any allowance. For the back pattern also, we are going to be adding half an inch sewing allowance all through, aside the armhole where we're not going to be adding any allowance. For the side seam, we're going to add 1 inch, and then for the hemline, we're not going to be adding any allowance. You can go ahead and add allowance at the hemline, just depends on how long you want it to be. So now I've also gone ahead to add interfacing to my fabric for the front and for the back as well. So now I'm just going to be facing the right side together, and I'm going to be sewing it on pattern paper 1. By the time you're done and you open it up, this is what it should look like. So at this point now, I'm going to be joining pattern paper 1 to fabric 2, and I'm just going to be joining it at the dart point as I'm showing you right now. So just place it the way as shown, and sew using half an inch sewing allowance. So by the time you're done, this is what it should look like. So after that, the next thing we are going to do is to join the fabric 3 to the other part of the fabric that we joined earlier, and as shown, we are going to be joining it like so. Take note that before I join the fabric, I make sure I do not remove the pattern paper from the fabric. I only remove it while I was ready to sew. This is just to ensure that I am not confused with the pieces of fabric that I have. If you remove the pattern paper when you're not ready to sew, you might end up mixing it up, and you may not know which one is for which. So make sure the pattern paper is always on the fabric until when you are ready to join it together. At this point also, I've also gone ahead to cut piece of fabric that I'll be using in front and also at the back. So right here also, what I did in front, I'm going to do the same thing for the back. And the point that I'm marking now is where the loop is going to be. So the first thing I'm going to do, just like I did for the front, unlike the front, I'm not going to be joining pattern paper 1 together, that is the fabric 1 together. Instead, I'm going to be joining it to fabric 2 at the dart line. So make sure you are joining it at the exact location where it's supposed to be. The back pattern is more confusing than the front, so make sure you notch the necessary point so that you know where exactly it's supposed to be, and then you join it. So when you're done, you're also going to join fabric 3 to the dart line also. And by the time you're done, you iron it open. This is what it should look like. For the front also, I've gone ahead to iron it open, and I've also gone ahead to notch the underbust area as shown, just to make it relax at that point. I also notched the waistline for this side dart. The next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be shaping the hemline of this top. If you want it to be straight, you can leave it as it is, but I want it to be a little bit curvy, so I'm going to be going up by 1.5 inch. And then now I'm just going to use my French curve to connect it all the way to the center, like so. So by the time you're done, you're just going to fold it as shown, making sure that you align both sides together, pin it down, and you cut off the excess. So by the time you open it up, this is what it should look like. I'm also going to do the same thing for the back, just like we did in front. I'll do the same thing for the back. And so by the time you're done, this is also what it should look like for the back. So now I'm just going to be joining the back to the front at the side seam using 1-inch sewing allowance, which is the sewing allowance we added while drafting the pattern. So now this is the piece of fabric that I cut earlier. I've gone ahead to take it to the sewing machine and I folded it 0.25 inches inward on both sides, and I've done it for about, let's say, 10 pieces or more, depending on the number of darts you have on the fabric. So now I'm just going to be placing the pattern pieces, aligning it to the dart line that we have on the fabric. So by the time you're sure it's well aligned, you're going to pin it down, and then you take another fabric and you place it on the next dart line, making sure that everything is aligned. So when you place it, you take it to the sewing machine and you sew it at the side of both of the Ankara fabric. Make sure you sew the left and the right side. With this, you're going to be creating the hole through which you are going to pass the bone into, and then afterwards you're going to be joining the remaining Ankara fabric on the other part of the dart line. So this is what I have by the time I was done adding the Ankara fabric to the remaining part of the darts. Take note, I did not add it at the side seam. I added it on every part aside the side seam. And then at this point, I've also gone ahead to do the same thing for the lining, making sure that I iron it open by the time I was done joining the darts together and also joining the front to the back. So now I'm going to be aligning the lining to the fabric, and I'm going to be sewing it using 1/2 inch from one point all the way to the next. So by the time I'm done sewing using 1/2 inch sewing allowance, this is what it looks like. So after that, I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to be notching it open like this. The essence of the notch is to make sure that by the time you turn it to the right side, everything is well relaxed around your neckline and also around your armhole. So by the time you're done notching, make sure you notch the armhole. I didn't notch it at this point, but I ended up notching it. So by the time you are done notching everywhere, you're going to turn it to the right side, and then you face the allowance to the lining, and then you take it to your sewing machine and understitch it all the way to the other end. So by the time you're done understitching and you press it down, you should have something like this. So now the next thing to do is we are going to be adding the loop to the back side of the top. So to do that, I'm going ahead to cut piece of rope that I'll be using as the loop. You can use a bias for this as well. If you have a bias, you can just fold the bias into two, and then you fold it as I'm showing you now, and you pin it down, making sure you align it to the neckline of the back as shown. So when you place it like so, you're going to measure from that point. You can measure 1 inch down or 1.5 inches down. Just depends on how opened you want the back to be. Personally, I'm using 1 inch away from the previous one. So after measuring, I'm going to fold another piece of rope and I'm going to pin it down like so. So I will repeat the same process all the way to the down part of the top. At the end of the day, I used about 12 piece. I think it's 12 piece of rope for just one side of the back. And then I use another 12 piece for the other side of the back, making sure that what I have for one side of the back is the same with what I have for the second part of the back. So when I'm done pinning, take it to the sewing machine and I'll sew it all the way down. So after sewing, the next thing we are going to do now is to join the boning, is to attach the boning to this top. So in order to do this, I'm going to be using my scissors to just file it so that the edges will be clean, or you can just file it on your wall, or if you have like a nail filer, you can use it to file it so that that edge will be clean. So by the time you're done, you're going to be inserting it through the hole that we created earlier. Attach it all the way to the end of the channel that we created, and then you pull it out about 0.75 inches, and then you cut it off. The essence of pulling it out is because we want to be able to sew at the hemming allowance. We don't want the boning to be all the way to the hemming allowance. We want that hemming allowance to be free from the boning, so that by the time we are joining it to the lining, we'll be able to sew on it. I don't know if that makes sense. So we are going to repeat the same process on the other part of the channel that we created all the way to the other side. By the time you're done and you iron it, you should have a very clean and straight boning channel. So now at this point, I connected the boning at the bust area all the way to the neckline of the bust area. So that 3 dart points, the middle and the 2 side that is close to the middle, I attached it all the way to the other side. But by the time I was done and I tried it on, I did not like the way it was looking around my bust area. It was not making it visible as I wanted it to be. So now I'm just going to pull out the boning that I attached all the way to the neckline, and I'm going to be stopping it at that under bust point that we marked, that we notched earlier. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side as well, and also for the middle. This step is completely optional. If you don't mind it to be all the way to the bust and neckline, you can just go ahead and attach the boning all the way to the neckline. But for me, I want my bust area to be prominent, and I feel stopping it at the under bust line will just create that, makes it more comfortable and more prominent. So yeah, when I was done, I will just cut off the excess of the boning. I'll sew on the under bust area so that the boning will not be able to pass through to the neckline. That is, you sew on it, on the fabric. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn it to the wrong side. We are going to be joining the lining to the fabric. In order to do that, we are going to be reducing the lining by 0.25 inch, just to ensure that the lining is not showing from the front side by the time we are done. So at this time, you're also going to open up the side seam. We are going to just open it up a little bit. This is because we want to be able to pass, well, in order to be able to turn it to the right side, we need a hole to be able to pass it through, and that's why we created that hole there. So when you're done opening up the hole, you are going to just turn it to the right side, and this is what it should look like. So now you just give it a really good press, and you should have a clean finish by the time you're done pressing it. So yeah, for the wrong side, that is the lining part, I'm just going to take it to the pressing iron. I'm going to close that opening that we created earlier so that it will not be opened. So now that's all for the Victorian corset. For the sleeve, I've gone ahead to cut a piece of fabric, which is a full circle fabric, a 4x4 full circle fabric. So by the time you open it up, you are going to be having about 12 for the width and also 12 for the other side as well. While for the semicircle, you're going to be having about 6 inches from the middle down. So now I'm just going to cut for the lining as well, and I'm going to be joining the lining to the fabric at this point that I'm showing you now. Remember, the lining, I'm using the same main ankara for the lining as well, and that's why it's like this. So after sewing it and turning it to the right side with the lining, I'm just going to be pleating it like I'm showing you. Just pleat it anyhow you want, just pleat it, and this is what you should have by the time you're done. So I pleated it into 3 I pleated it into 3 parts, and then now I just sewed the edges of it so that it will be in place. And then now I'm just going to be joining it to the Victorian corset at the armhole area. So just take your time and sew it directly on it, and that will be all for this tutorial. I'll do the same thing for the other side as well, and that will be all for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your post notification bell so that whenever I post a new video, you'll be notified. Thank you.